And here we are at the back of the case. Notice an output shaft and a big old nut and a tapered roller bearing. We'll have to loosen this nut, remove this slip-on shaft off, and then we can remove that assembly from the case. Now this big old nut is locked down with a little pinched area to the shaft on both sides. We'll have to pull that back up and then loosen the nut. Give her a few blows and get this shaft off here. We finally got this shaft off. It's retained in there by this little ring. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. We had to pound on it pretty hard with a slide hammer to get this off. This is really the only way to remove this is with a slide hammer. This ring goes on this shaft here, and the shaft slides over this and kind of floats loosely on it. And you can see the notch in there, and there's still a part of the old ring in there, so we'll have to get a new clip. As you can see, the shaft has a big nut on it for this tapered bearing and this assembly to come out the front. We'll have to remove that. Now, most cases we would stick a socket on there with an impact and take it off. There's another way to do this, and we're gonna try it. We're gonna engage the transmission's parking pawl. Here's one way to lock this parking pawl onto this drum. We'll take a screwdriver, push it down there, and it will lock the shaft. You can see there that the parking pawl is locked onto the notches in the drum, just as you would if you put your vehicle in park. We're going to use this as leverage to get this big nut off. What we're going to do before we try to remove this nut is try to get these dimples unlocked from their respective positions. As you see, there's two of them. Now, this is a hardened bolt. It's going to be a little tough. Now these tabs are kind of thin for your typical chisel, so you can take you can take a standard chisel and grind it to the width of this particular land here, so we can drop this down in here. We're going to give her a shot. As you can see, we got this big nut off. If you can't spread these dimples that we talked about earlier enough, you can remove this nut with a little extra force. We used our big crescent wrench in this place to illustrate. It's not too tight. It's the little locking stubs that end up making it a little stiff. There's your nut. And as you can see, we have a tapered bearing and this assembly that we discussed earlier that needs to come out. It's not a press fit, it's an interference fit. You can get it out by giving it some taps. And here we have the parking lock mechanism and rear planetary. There's another tapered bearing on the rear of that. Now would be a good time to check this planetary out. Look at your gears. These have a slight amount of wear on the edge of the teeth. You may not be able to see it in the camera. They also have side thrust bearings, and they should have no play in the bushings themselves. That one doesn't. We'll check this one over real quick. It's normal. This one looks good. And this one looks fine. It doesn't look like it's been overheated. It's not discolored. The ring gear is fine. The bushings are fine. There you have that part. So that's pretty much the back of the case. The one thing we have left is this piston. And as you've seen earlier, when we talked about the Bellevue Spring, well, there's one more in the back of this case. We're going to take our snap ring pliers. Get in there. Now these can pop out violently just like that. There are special tools to compress those, but that's not the purpose of this video. Now this is a Bellevue Spring. Pay close attention to how you pull it out. Remember, the tabs will face the bell housing, such as this. This would be the wrong way. This would be right. Set this aside with your stack of other parts. And then we have this piston in here. This is a molded, bonded rubber piston. Before we take it completely out, we'll have to remove the parking pawl mechanism from the case. You can see the parking pawl mechanism underneath this pin that locks that drum we just removed. This pin has to be removed in order to remove that bonded rubber piston. So we're going to drive it out through here. Now on the back side of it, there is a staked in plug, and it will push that out when we knock it out. You can take your regular old punch, angle it just right, tap on the pin. The plug will pop out. There's the plug. There's the pin. It's partially out. We'll have to pry it the rest of the way out. Just be careful not to hurt the case the best you can. Pry it out a little bit with a screwdriver, take your punch, and the best you can. And here comes the pin. You can leave the pin hanging there. It's interference fit enough that it should stay in there. Now the second pin in the parking pawl mechanism is retained by this 8mm nut or bolt. Take the bolt out. Side. Now I'll be able to smack that pin with a punch. Now looking down in the case, you'll see this area. I have my hand through the bell housing. That's where the other pin is. Take your punch or your pick, push the pin out. This one you'll have to keep aside because it won't stay in there like that pin. A good way, stick it in your parking pawl mechanism, and there you have it. We'll set that aside. Now we can come back to this piston in question, and we can remove it from the case. Rip it with your pick, give it a slight pull, and she's out. Now, note where this is, or keep in mind where this is, and this these top two open areas will go in this location here, between this pin and the other pin. Pull your piston out. Pistons. We can give those a good look over too. Older Chrysler 41 TEs and 42 RLEs had an aluminum piston assembly with rubber flip seals on it that you could remove and change. This is what they call a bonded rubber piston, meaning if it fails, you have to replace the whole assembly, the whole piston. That's how they do a lot of things these days. Set that aside. And last but not least in this case is the piston housing. It's a steel tray, steel round tray, bolted to the case with a gasket on the back. This gasket seals this to the case, and apply oil is fed in through this hole, which forces this piston to activate that particular clutch. We're going to remove these 3 ports. Now this particular piston we're removing, or piston housing we're removing, has a couple problems from the factory when it comes to sealing. And in our shift kit, which we got with the overhaul materials, has a fix for a certain kind of problem, and we'll explain when we remove this housing. As you can see, these 3 screws have some blue stuff on them. That's Loctite, and we'll make sure we Loctite those back before we reassemble it. You can only line this up one way, so you can't mess it up. And here is a complete piston assembly. This will fit in here, like so. This gasket seals here to the case. Oil is fed through here, pushes this piston out, and applies this particular clutch. We got a few last things before we finish off with tearing down this whole transmission. And there's 2 accumulators here, and an accumulator here. What accumulators do in a hydraulic system is pretty much soften the blow of something. The accumulators in this case, when a clutch applies, oil flows through these first and will compress them and then go to the clutch to be applied. So it softens the blow and you have a good nice shift quality. So these are our accumulator springs. You just pull those out and then lift up on your accumulator. You'll see a couple little what they call scarf cut seals. We're going to replace those when we do our overhaul and clean them up real good. Our shift kit has a couple little neat updates for these, which we'll show during the cleanup and overhaul process. Both accumulators are exactly the same dimension, so it does not matter which one goes in, they will fit. They don't fit tight, and both springs are the same. You can mix these up and be okay. Now we have an accumulator down here too, low reverse or reverse clutch accumulator. We're going to have to remove a snap ring to get it out, and it is essentially the same type of accumulator, just covered. You get your snap ring out. We have a molded covered seal. The older ones are aluminum with a scarf cut seal or an O-ring in their place. This is all molded, just like our big piston down there. Now this one is upside down in comparison to those. So what we can do is take a little compressed air in a hole, which we'll show you, and blow this one out. So we're going to blow this accumulator out of this hole. If you look back here where my air gun is pointed, there's a little bitty hole. We're going to shoot a little air in this hole. Shoot a little air in that hole and catch it off the top. Now that we have our case disassembled, it's time to clean it. Now some people have a parts tank to clean things, and some may not. You can use either spray cleaner of some sort or a parts tank, scrub it down. But the point is to get everything clean. You want these things really free of dirt and any kind of material, or you may have some kind of problem in the future. So what we're going to do is clean up the case and all of our components and then get ready for reassembly.